Welcome to End Match, where every slam dunk, every ace serve, every final shot, and every last-second victory comes alive. From NBA courts to WNBA arenas, from tennis courts to golf greens, we bring you the fastest highlights, the biggest plays, and the most thrilling game-ending moments. All packed into one channel where the action never stops, the energy never fades, and every game ends here, at End Match. No one anticipated that Coco Gauff would become the spark that caused a wildfire to spread across the world of tennis. However, that is precisely what occurred. In a sport based on discipline, quiet, and cautious guarded routines, one unplanned sentence destroyed the delusion of command. What transpired was not a match, not a rivalry, not a tale of redemption, but a collision between visibility, trust, and contemporary notoriety. A private conversation involving Tommy Paul, Eala, and Alex, never intended for public consumption, it was abruptly projected onto millions of screens all over the world. The time lasted for a few seconds, but the shockwaves stretched for several weeks. Pulling three, none of the young stars entered a storm. Had been ready for. This wasn't merely rumors. This was the structure of a scandal that began in real time. To comprehend why was the response so violent, must comprehend the weight of each person who was present at the time. These weren't supporting actors. These were names associated with countries, expectations, and futures that are much bigger than themselves. Alex Eala was not just a gifted athlete. In the Philippines, she represented potential. At just 20, she had already left her mark on history by winning the girls' singles championship at the US Open, becoming a lighthouse for a starving nation for representation at the highest levels of tennis. Every time she appeared felt patriotic. Every point she scored felt like a shared experience. She spoke and grinned effortlessly, thoughtfully, and exuded a calmness that concealed how devastating the pressure was real. Tommy Paul was busy a different area. He was America's quiet competitor, a player long regarded as gifted but incomplete, hovering just below superstardom before ultimately making progress. Listed as one of the world's best, he had a serene intensity that admirers found appealing. In contrast to many, he kept his private life private from his peers, sealed off. No posts that are dramatic, no public love affairs, no fake susceptibility. His identity was based on control, and that control resulted in what became even more unstable. When the cameras captured an unplanned moment, it struck the picture he had put in years of effort to maintain. And after that, Coco Gauff was the voice that everyone heard. A Grand Slam already champion, already well known in society, Coco lived at the meeting point of sport and impact. She spoke candidly, responded truthfully, and presented herself as someone who doesn't mind being authentic in a world dominated by prepared responses. Supporters adored her for it. The media depended on it. However, authenticity comes at a price. Additionally, on a typical evening, that expense turned into unbearably clear. When Coco said something without considering, she did not simply disclose the specifics. Unlocked a door that could never be shut down again. The environment appeared innocuous. A post-event informal and laid-back interview, broadcast live on several platforms. The purpose of these moments is to humanize after tension, players will laugh. To provide a behind-the-scenes look. Coco sat contentedly, making jokes with the interviewer, thinking back on her season, her development, and her touring relationships. When questioned about young people's friendships, she leaned into the subject, players. Of course, discussing support systems and common experiences. Everything felt secure. Next, the statement that altered everything. She casually alluded to a backstage exchange between Tommy and Alex. A quick conversation she framed as a tiny object, something personal, which she took to mean nothing to anybody else. The change was instantaneous. The interviewer paused. Coco's face wavered, consciousness awakening too late. The broadcast made an effort to move on, but the harm was already irreversible. The moment was captured by viewers. Prior to the conclusion of the segment, screenshots were shared on all platforms. Speculation started more quickly than clarification at all. What precisely had Coco disclosed? What made her say that? And why did it seem like something that was not meant to be out of that room? In a matter of minutes, the tennis website was unidentifiable. The number of questions increased more quickly than responses. Were Tommy and Alex involved? Romantically, was there a secret connection? Had a private moment took place behind the scenes? Or was this just an inflated private exchange based on conjecture? The fire was fueled by silence. Tommy did not attend his scheduled media appearance. His group is only releasing an ambiguous statement regarding unavailability. Coco posted a mysterious message a few hours later, providing contemplation but no justification. Alex remained silent. Within the vacuum, the internet quickly filled the void with hypotheses. The hashtag that appeared was not limited to playing tennis. It's entered the mainstream discourse, attracting individuals who have no interest in the sport but a never-ending thirst for drama. Fans analyzed previous body language competitions, replayed interview frames by frame, and created timelines using stray images. Innocent exchanges were recast as proof. Moments of neutrality became symbols that were loaded. The narrative wasn't more detail about what took place. It was concerning what people desired to think had occurred. For those who support Alex, particularly those from the Philippines, the response was defensive and ferocious. Many perceived the incident as a betrayal, a needless disclosure of someone who had done nothing to warrant investigation. Social media was inundated with accusations. Coco of indifference, of jealousy, of taking advantage of trust for amusement. Extended threads that examined each previous communication between the two females, looking for evidence of hidden bitterness. A story quickly emerged, and obstinately. Alex had been mistreated, and it was Coco's fault. Fans of Coco pushed back with equal force. They quarreled that nothing really illuminating had been stated, that in the absence of a secret, there wasn't harmful. Some recommended Alex's silence suggested guilt, that the fear originated from being rather than exposure. Observed. Some accused Alex of taking advantage of from the focus, consciously or not at all. The vocabulary became more severe. The debate became more ugly. What started off as speculation turned into an assault. Tommy's admirers discovered themselves split. Some claimed he was deserving of privacy, that whatever took place was no one's concern. Others said disappointment and annoyance that off-sea court noise could drown out his advancement on the court. A louder but smaller, the group romanticized the circumstances, completely creating fan art, edits, and imagined narratives that changed uncertainty into fantasy. In their hands, the lack of information turned into freedom of creativity. Media outlets observed the engagement figures are rising and kept up with the momentum. Headlines questioned limits, allegiance, and accountability. Podcasts that are entirely episodes to deciphering a brief of video. Professionals were asked to comment on friendship, psychology, and have faith. Every perspective was investigated, with the exception of the most basic one, inquiring as to whether the public had a right to know all of this. Not at all. National identities were incorporated into the quiet discussion, but clearly forming allegiances and heightened feelings. This wasn't longer only about people. It was concerning sides. The noise increased in volume, the player's silence grew more noticeable. In a society that is dependent on prompt reactions, the absence of the explanation seemed thought-provoking. A few saw it as a tactic. Others observed it as a means of avoidance. However, beneath the conjecture, something more profound was unfolding. 3 youthful athletes, each hardly older than teenagers, were being compelled to face the fact that in their world, privacy was contingent. At most, what caused the circumstance to even the lack of a clear villain or an obvious crime? No regulations had been damaged. No agreements were broken. However, reputations were actually changing. Time. Sponsors kept a close eye on things. The public every hour, perception changed. The sport itself appeared to disappear into the background as the narrative progressed focus. Additionally, just as the initial shock started to grow wary, just as some thought the frenzy might burn itself out, new fuel emerged. Old pictures reappeared. Grainy pictures of Alex and Tommy was laughing as they sat close to each other, conversing, sharing a space. Moments of innocence recast as evidence. That the case was declared closed on the internet, even despite the fact that nothing had been proven. The blaze that began with one now, the sentence raged uncontrollably. What nobody appeared eager to think about was the potential that nothing scandalous had ever been, that the reality, whatever it was, it could be commonplace. The reaction's intensity revealed more about the spectators than the athletes. However, reason was not very powerful at the time. The narrative had eluded its authors. Moreover, while everyone waited for someone to talk, the pressure that lies behind the quiet kept expanding, guaranteeing that when the truth eventually came to light, it would have to battle its way through a mountain of presumptions first. 48 hours following the interview went viral on the internet. The sound had not subsided. It had changed. What had started out as shock had turned into anticipation. People were no longer merely conjecturing. They made demands, responses. In a world where quiet is perceived as guilt, the rejection of Tommy Paul, Coco Gauff, and Alex Eala to instantly describe how they felt like a defiant act. Each hour without clarification strengthened the notion that there was a serious secret being kept. The peace that pervaded their public previously profiles seemed strange, nearly suspicious, as though self-control itself had turned into a provocation. The Coco's first formal action was camp. Her supervisors issued a declaration that was calm, considerate, and well-balanced. It discussed appreciating friendships, regretting unintentional discomfort, of personal outreach and aspirations for comprehension. It said all the right things on paper. In actuality, nobody was satisfied. The avoiding details in the wording, naming no names, providing no indication of what had been mentioned on television. For it sounded corporate to critics. Insulation as opposed to personal responsibility. For supporters, it was a reminder that not every error warrants punishment in public. The declaration landed gently, but the earth beneath it was already trembling. Alex's reply showed up. It was even quieter later. No interview, just a picture. No explanation. Shared a video of herself practicing by herself online as the sun began to set, her shadow extending over a vacant court. The short, nearly cryptic caption was a line regarding focus and control. It wasn't a rejection. It wasn't an affirmation. It was a limit. However, boundaries imply little to a believing audience. Owns the story. The remarks below her post immediately created a chaotic mix of support, rage, empathy, and privilege. Some encouraged her to stay. Powerful. Transparency was demanded by others. Many just wanted the narrative to proceed. In the background, her team decided on a purposeful course. They released a declaration not to foreign media, but to Filipino media, confirming that she continued to focus on the competition, that her private life was closed off to conjecture, and that rumors wouldn't be amused. The wording highlighted her youth, her privacy rights, and the unfairness of the examination. It was a subtle but effective reminder that there was a young woman beneath the headlines, still adjusting to adulthood in a microscope. For her domestic audience, the message struck a deep chord. For all, if not, it was written off as avoidance. Tommy Paul didn't show up. Not a single post, no acknowledgement, no remarks. His silence developed its own narrative. A few praised it as self-control, a refusal to justify rumors. Others denounced it as desertion, claiming that he was leaving two women to deal with the consequences of something he participated in as well. The longer he remained silent, the more his assumptions filled the void. In this setting, silence was not impartial. It was reinterpreted, transformed, and turned into a weapon. As authoritative voices withdrew, while unofficial ones hurried forward. There were unidentified sources. Everywhere, each asserting knowledge, each in opposition to the previous one. One insisted that Coco had issued a direct apology and been turned down. Another stated that Alex and Tommy had been seeing each other discreetly, and were incensed that the secrecy had been broken. A third rejected the whole, such as an exaggerated miscommunication, nothing more than support between coworkers. The issue wasn't that these tales did exist. That was it. People selected the versions that best suited their favorite story and handled them as truth. Meanwhile, the repercussions started to become real outside of social media. Sponsors kept a careful eye on sentiment, avoid being associated with controversy. Teams in charge of public relations recalculated communicating. The organizers of the tournament prepared for uncomfortable press conferences. The governing bodies said nothing. Officially not involved, but keenly aware that three of the most gifted young athletes, something was reshaping faces. Completely unconnected to performance. The game of tennis itself had lost importance. The story was a spectacle. Next, the picture that brought everything back to life. A backstage photo appeared, timestamped just prior to the interview. It all began with that. Tommy and Alex were sitting close to one another, grinning, at ease. His hand was idly resting on her shoulder. The image was unremarkable, the kind that was captured hundreds of times at competitions all over the world. However, context was no longer important. The picture was regarded as verification, evidence that all conjecture had been warranted. Along, it spread more quickly than any statement that could be reframed with captions that implied confidentiality, closeness, and dishonesty. The flames, which had roared back to life, starting to smolder. What made the circumstance particularly was concerning how quickly the tone changed from being curious to passing judgment. People talked confidently about feelings they were unable to see and intentions they were unable to ascertain. Allegiances solidified. Supporters did not defend individuals, but variations of them had built. The narrative was no longer fluid. It was resolved despite that the facts were still unclear. 10 days later, the first time that fatigue had started to take the place of indignation, the truth at last joined the discussion. It did not come via a press statement or a staged declaration. It arrived via a lengthy, reflective interview that Alex Eala conducted to a reporter she had faith in, someone who had tracked her path since her junior years. The scene was serene, though the tone was sincere. There was not any drama in only fatigue in her voice. She clarified that neither romance nor secret existed. Relationship, no treachery. Tommy, she claimed to be a longtime friend. They had been acquainted for many years, frequently running into each other as juniors, re-establishing contact more regularly as their professional careers that overlap. Prior to her last game at the competition, she had been overpowered by anxiety. The burden of anticipation, the importance of the occasion, had almost tore her apart. Tommy saw. He took a seat, conversed with her backstage. It reminded her of her readiness and her entitlement to be present. That was the Coco made reference to that moment. Nothing further, nothing less. While Alex was speaking, the explanation's ease of use contrasted sharply with the mayhem it had caused. She talked about discussing it with Coco. Later, not as rumors but as appreciation, sharing a special time with a companion. She acknowledged that after hearing it repeated harm done in public, not because it exposed misconduct, but because it revealed a private matter that had never intended for public viewing. She admitted Coco's error without denouncing her, realizing how simple under lights, words can slip out in microphones. When directly questioned about Alex, brushed off dating rumors. Firmly, but gently. Even if it had been indeed, she claimed that she had trouble comprehend why it would be made public. Property. Friendship, she said, didn't need to be explained. Privacy did not need an explanation. Her there was no disappointment. Misinterpreted, but in having to elucidate. Something that shouldn't have necessary defense. The interview changed the atmosphere almost instantly. For the first time since the event, there was an account of events based on a named voice, a genuine viewpoint instead rather than conjecture. Some individuals agreed it immediately, relieved to see the circumstances rooted in reality. Others refused to give up on the drama. They had made an investment. In actuality, it turned out was not as powerful as indignation. Tommy Paul eventually spoke a few days later, opting for moderation rather than detail. The post was straightforward, just a practice photo. They were both at ease and grinning, accompanied by a description of actual friendship and shifting attention back to tennis. There was no justification. No, sorry, I'm not interested in rumors. It was a declaration of alignment as opposed to defense, an effort to end the chapter without giving it more food. Coco followed in her own manner, responding to the circumstances directly through a brief video. She admitted her error, without hesitation, acknowledging that she had revealed something that wasn't hers to distribute. She expressed her regret to Alex in public, putting a focus on development, accountability, and learning. The message seemed unfiltered and unprocessed, a reminder of the reasons behind trusted her voice in the first place. It did not make the past disappear, but it reframed it as a human error rather than a deliberate action. Gradually, the temperature decreased. The headlines became softer. Discussions changed. The lack of scandal became indisputable. What was left was an unsettling insight. As in the whole story had been written, from pieces motivated by conjecture maintained through participation. The narrative that had taken over the tennis world had never actually existed. And when the dust settled, a new, more subdued question surfaced, but more disturbing than any rumor. If a lot of harm could be done without misconduct, what did that indicate about the observing culture from the outside? When the last justifications were ultimately spoken and the real story became visible, in plain sight, something surprising occurred. The mayhem did not start right away, vanish. Rather, it persisted, clinging to the comment sections, resonating in late-night discussions, and reappearing in subtle ways that demonstrated how challenging it is to turn a story around once it has taken hold. Even with lucidity, even with, to be honest, some people were unwilling to let go. Additionally, they had expended too much emotion, excessive identity and certainty into a version of what happened that caused them to feel justified. Recognizing the truth meant acknowledging involvement in a storm that never had to be there. For Alex Eala, the aftermath was complicated. In public, her career did not stall. If anything, her profile increased. She was followed by more eyes. Matches. More admirers supported her. Calmness and self-control. Her interview was commended for its maturity. Her refusal to assault anyone who is perceived as strength as opposed to weakness. Within the Philippines, she developed into more than a rising star. She came to represent dignity when under duress. Someone who refused to follow the sound. However, in private, the encounter left its mark. Changes were observed by those near her that statistics were unable to demonstrate. She grew more cautious and selective with her confidence, more conscious that even compassion could be misconstrued after filtering via millions of unfamiliar people. That the purity of moments spent together had been changed forever. Coco Gauff confronted the most direct examination, and she didn't flee from it. Rather than hiding behind, she leaned towards silence or legalese. Into responsibility. She was candid in subsequent interviews regarding the obligation that results from having a platform, regarding the distinction between integrity and negligence. She recognized that genuineness without even when awareness is beneficial. The intentions are sincere. For a lot of fans, this response reaffirmed their beliefs in her in the first instance. She didn't refute the error. She took it in and discovered from it, and let it mold her expansion. Although her friendship with Alex was altered but not destroyed, it turned into more cautious, quieter, and constructed on an improved comprehension of boundaries. While some wounds do not go away, they can transform into something more intelligent. Paul Tommy went back into competition using the same calm concentration that had always characterized him. He let the results speak on the court. Powerful praise was given after performances. For his poise during a time that could have the surface level, in discussions that never took place because the danger seemed excessive. For Tommy, Coco, and Alex's survival did not imply erasure. It required adjustment. They became wiser and more conscious of that each word has an invisible weight, and make a gesture. They discovered that in their world, intention is not always important. As much as perception and quietness can be a burden as well as a shield. Their professions advanced, but with a new layer of alertness that young people should never must carry so early. Additionally, for the audience, the event presented an option. It inquired as to whether we would proceed, consuming athletes as fictional characters instead than individuals, whether we would require perfection from people still discovering their identities, whether we would continue to confuse curiosity with ownership. It forced us to think about the harm, carried out by conjecture under the guise of worry. The narrative started with a single sentence delivered without malice and turned into a worldwide spectacle that made 3 young athletes defend their humanity. After the dust had settled, there was nothing scandalous left. No betrayal, no covert romance, no conspiracy, merely a friend offering assistance, another friend saying recklessly, and a populace ready to turn pieces into a work of fiction. Eala, Coco, and Alex, Tommy, Paul, and Gauff moved on. They continued to play, compete, and develop. The actual query is whether a private moment the next time enters the public eye, we stop before evaluating whether we recall that behind each headline depicts a person navigating pressures that we will never completely comprehend. Because in the event that this taught anything, it's the best words spoken on the subject never caused harm. Live broadcasting. It was carried out by the millions of voices hurried to fill the quiet, certain they deserved and response that was never due to them initially.